everyone. This is Dr. Deborah Owens with another episode of Wisdom for Today. And today's topic has to do with critical race theory. And back in July, Bill and I were invited by a local pastor to share about our ministry or to share what was on our heart. And critical race theory is a topic that has not only been in the media, but it has been impacting and affecting many families and children in school across America. And so when the pastor asked me if we would come and share, he wanted to actually introduce us to other pastors in the area. As you all know, we recently moved to Texas, and we've been here in this community about 2 years. And so he wanted to introduce us to pastors in our area. We were so grateful and thankful for the opportunity. This took place back in the summer, and we've been talking about critical race theory, but I wanted to go ahead and share the video that the pastor was kind enough to videotape my presentation and Bill's presentation as well. The topic for this presentation and this show was what I talked about, critical race theory, and we're going to share Bill's topic on the civil rights movement in another episode. But critical race theory is a dangerous theory. It's pitting blacks against whites, but in a reverse way than what we saw during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And so I want you to listen with an open mind and share the video with your friends and your neighbors in your network. And the reason why I feel it's important to share this video is there are a lot of people talking about critical race theory that are not from the Black community. And there's more credibility to the issue if a Black person is standing up and speaking about the need to cancel critical race theory. They want to cancel everything else. We need to cancel critical race theory. And so as a Black mom who has an earned Doctor of Education degree from Vanderbilt University, so I am an educator, I came at this from an education point of view. In fact, part of the presentation is almost as if you are in school because I break it down for the audience. And I use a PowerPoint slide as my presentation. So keep an open mind. Listen to my thoughts about the issue, and I give some solutions and some things that parents can do, pastors can do, and we as a community can do. And now is the time for like-minded people to stand together, Blacks, whites, browns, people of all faiths and races that believe it is unwise, it's not scriptural, and it is the reverse of what we've already been through. It's saying that one race now, the Black race, is supposed to be superior and held in higher esteem, and one race, the Black race, is being oppressed and puts them as the victim, and the whites are the oppressors. And I just have to speak out, and will continue speaking out on this topic. So listen with an open heart, my presentation on understanding critical race theory. And at the end, please share it with your friends, as I said, your neighbors, your network, and write to me and let me know what you thought at dowens@caapusa.org. God bless you, and thank you for standing with us. Thank you for partnering with us, and thank you for always praying for our ministry and believing in our work. Bill and I appreciate you, each and every one of you, very much. God bless you. Until next time, this is Dr. Deborah Owens with another episode of Wisdom for Today. So the title of my presentation today is Understanding Critical Race Theory and its Divisive Impact. How many of you raise your hands if you've heard the term recently, critical race theory? How many of us really understand what critical race theory is? Do we understand it? Okay, a couple of us. And so today I'm going to try to explain, did some research, and fascinating information. It's going to be kind of like almost being in school for a minute, but then I'm going to try to break it down for you. And so since we're in a room with pastors and church leaders, I thought it would be appropriate to start with a scripture. Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. And so we tend to, as a people, judge people by appearances, how they dress, how they look, how they act. But most importantly, oftentimes we judge by race. God said, don't do this, but instead judge correctly. And we evaluate people, and we don't really know it, but we evaluate people from a place of judgment instead of evaluating them from a place of love and forgiveness. So what is critical race theory? I want to ask you to answer this question, because before we can move on, I want to get a definition, because I've heard some people on television can't even define what racism is. So who wants to take a try and define racism for me? Anybody? Nobody? Racism is a personal prejudice. It's just bottom line, just a personal prejudice. On the micro level, it is internalized and it's interpersonal. On the macro level, it's institutional and structural. Okay? Can someone tell me what theory is? Anybody want to take a stab at theory? Definition of theory? Okay, I'll read it for you. A set of beliefs or principles that might not be proven yet. Any theory can and should be tested, but the test must be scientifically conducted and reviewed by many qualified researchers. So this critical race theory, we don't even know if it has been reviewed by qualified researchers, but we hear a lot about it. So what is critical race theory? It's an academic theory that is applied to history as well as every facet of modern life to explain and correct issues of racism and discrimination. So it's similar to Marxism, but instead of focusing on class, it focuses on race, and it is the prism through which every aspect of our society is interpreted. So it's the lens. They look at everything through the lens of racism. So we're being set up. It's nothing to do with individuals, but it's systemic and it's institutional. So CRT, critical race theory, redefines racism so that everyone is guilty of white supremacy. I'm not going to read this entire slide, but I do want to read what's in red. White supremacy in this context does not refer to individual white people and their individual intentions or actions, but to an overarching political, economic, and social
system of domination. And there's a book, some of you might have heard of it, White Fragility, by Robin DiAngelo. And she continues, and I know we have some white people in the room, so I'm just trying to educate you right now on what's being said about you. White people need to think about race. This is what DiAngelo continues. Think about how you fit into racist systems if they want to be anti-racist. Even if you don't think people should be treated differently because of their race, they automatically will be mistreated across those systems. And she mentioned some of those: education, healthcare, criminal justice, housing, banking, and so on. And so she is saying that racism is across the board. And guess what? Bill and I are white supremacists. Key elements of critical race theory. And so we've just said systemic racism. You've all heard the term white privilege. Society perpetuates white supremacy by imposing white concepts. I'm going to talk about that in the next couple of slides, but there's a little handout on the table that'll let you know about some of the concepts. And this is key, the next one: equity over equality. So equity is synonymous with fairness and justice. Equity is a solution for addressing imbalanced social systems. And so, for example, you'll hear someone on TV say, they'll talk about poverty, or they'll talk about black children in urban settings that are not getting a good education. And so, to me, a better word would be access, and I think we can all agree in this room that black children that are locked in failing schools should have access to a good education, safe communities, and so forth. It's an issue, to me, in my opinion, of access, not equity. And if they're not getting it, it's poor leadership in those communities. In my opinion, it starts with the leadership in those communities. And oftentimes, I'm black, I can say it, they're run by black people. So it's not racist, it's political. So this is just a little history of CRT, which started as critical theory, and it began in the 1930s. The goal of CT has always been to attack Western institutions. And so where is America? We're in the West. And norms, and to do what? They want to tear them down and start over. So in the US, it was dominated by critical legal theory. So it started on the legal side first, and now it's moved into higher education, which focuses on using the law to overturn modern social structures. Strong association with relativism and postmodernism. CRT versus civil rights principles. CRT may be sold as tolerance, in quotes, or civil rights, but its fixation on race is solely led on race. It's antithetical to our founding principles. You might have heard of Ibram Kendi. Many of you didn't raise your hand that you even knew what CRT was about. So he's out there on TV. And this gave me a headache, actually. I couldn't follow his line of thought. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. Look it up in his book. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. God is not in that. God is not in that. When we talk about civil rights, we know Martin Luther King Jr. has many quotes, and this is one of his quotes. "I look to a day when people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character." And I think many of us know that quote very well. And I would say that that quote is the epitome of John 7:24, the scripture I just read to you. We tend to judge by appearance, but we should learn to judge correctly. So, targets of critical race theory. So who are they targeting? What are they targeting? Everything. Schools and curricula, indoctrinating children in CRT view of history. America is fundamentally racist. The system favors white children over minorities. Anti-capitalism, identity politics. The part about the system favoring white children over minorities really is what got me motivated to start researching CRT and now speaking on it. We've done a couple of videos and we're sharing it because I think it's unfair for me to tell our 9 and 8 and 9-year-old that they're victims. They're not victims. They're far from being victims. And that their white friends at school are their oppressors. That's not true. And it's not right. It's not godly. Culture and society, re-education and adoption of CRT principles through corporate diversity training. How many of us have, all of a sudden, you got to learn to be more tolerant, and there's all this corporate diversity training going on in many corporations, and I'm going to tell the truth, they just don't want to be called a racist. So they implement these diversity training. So we have the social pressure, and then we have the cancel culture. So someone says something against CRT. Fortunately for me, we lead a nonprofit. So as long as I'm not endorsing a candidate, we're good. I can speak on issues. If they could, they would shut us down. And they've tried, and that's another story. But my husband and I are committed to telling the truth at the end of the day, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to share information and enlighten people. Political and legal. Ultimate goal is to tear down America's white and racist legal government institutions to make them more equitable, possibly through socialist redistribution. And so, how many of you have heard of AOC? So AOC and her squad are pushing for socialism. So it's a real agenda. It's a real agenda. And I'll let you decide, and you decide through learning about the issues and voting correctly and letting your voice be heard. But I'll let you decide if you believe that they'll be successful in trying to turn our country into a socialist country. So you have a couple of sheets on the table about the white culture. And this too also made, I was born in Panama, and my friends know I'm peaceful, I'm usually calm, I'm cool-headed, but, and I was raised in New York, but if you mess with my husband or my children, or there's something that I don't like, the Panama and the New York will come out. So the Panama and the New York, when I read stuff like this, it's insulting. It's insulting not only to white people, but it's insulting to African Americans. When taken to the classroom, the central lessons of critical race theory are: America is racist, capitalism is racist and wrong. White people are responsible for that racism and should bear shame and guilt for their part in the privilege that they experience. At the elementary level, this becomes America's bad because it is racist and white people are responsible for that. And so they took this flyer was actually on the Smithsonian website, and they took it down. And so white people supposedly are the only culture that believe in hard work, punctuality, Christianity, monotheism, judging intent, and handing down legal penalties, competition, and so forth. This reductive stereotyping that can actually be insulting to other cultures, and I am insulted by that. I have a PhD from Vanderbilt University. Many of my family members are educated. My niece is getting ready to finish Spelman next year. I have a nephew who has a master's. My sister has a master's. So I'm insulted that they're saying that only white people can have these values. And imagine how rich Oprah Winfrey could be if America were not so racist. Imagine how far Obama could have gone in his political career if we were not so racist. So, sending the wrong message. Focus on equitable outcome rather than equal treatment. Has some schools incorporating CRT into school discipline structures. So we've listed some of those school districts. And so if a student is cutting up, I'm a school teacher, taught middle school for 11 years. I've taught on the college level. I actually taught at UNLV in the teacher prep program, taught teachers how to teach. And so where there's no discipline, there is no learning. So if you got a child cutting up in the classroom, you have to handle that issue, and sometimes that means removing that student out of the classroom. But now through CRT, they're saying you can't exclude that child. He has to stay in the classroom. And so the students who are there, who want to learn, it's unfair to them because they're not learning. So to me, it's madness. CRT used to attack free speech on campus and beyond. Certain views, academic views shared by professionals, are considered too dangerous or even violent to be allowed a platform. So here is someone with some common sense, and she has a book, Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. They have a book where they talk about these scholars in academia who are actually like rogue scholars who are now pushing in higher ed. So she's saying that it's violent and they should not be allowed a platform. So you might want to take a look at that book. So I'm not sure if you all have heard of this incident that happened at Smith College, and unfortunately, I might mess up the name, but this young lady was a student, and she claimed she was racially profiled by a janitor who called security on her for eating in a restricted area. I should have put that in bold capital. She was in a restricted area. She was somewhere she was not supposed to be to begin with. Subsequent investigation found no evidence of racial bias. Janitor acted according to policy, but employees were still forced to apologize and undergo mandatory anti-bias training. So the college, to be seen in a good light, put their employees through all of this, even though the employee followed policy. She was so devastated and humiliated and all of this, and she was wrong. And it was wrong the way they treated these employees. And so my husband and I, we work with like-minded organizations, and Robert Woodson of the Woodson Center reached out to us to join him and others in a letter. And so we did, and that there's a quote there at the bottom of the screen here, and you can read that. I'm not going to read it to you, but that's, at the end of the day, that's what Bill and I do. We stand up for what's right, for what's just, for what's fair, and when people reach out, we try to act, and that's what we do. How to combat CRT in the classroom. I'm going to turn to that slide because I am having a hard time following it. Schools must make K-12 curriculum materials available to taxpayers and families. So we should know what's being taught in our children's grandchildren, if you don't have any school-age children, classrooms. Focus on civics over diversity training. How about that? Why don't we go back to just teaching civics? Allow teachers to get certified outside of leftist college systems. There are a lot of colleges that are Christian colleges, and not all of them are following the CRT model. Improve focus on teaching America's founding democratic principles. That's a good idea. Give parents better access to school boards, especially regarding curricula decisions. Parents need to get involved more. There's a slide coming up about that. Improve school choice options. So Bill and I got into, I'll tell a bit of our conversion to the, and I probably shouldn't say, but we got into the conservative movement. Let's leave it there. On the school choice issue back in the 90s when charter schools was still a relatively new concept, and John Walton of Walmart at the time was trying to open some charter schools in California. And the famous Milton Friedman and all of those people who were trying to push back then, we were converted because we said, they're trying to help our black children. And so school choice for parents is going to be critical more today because of CRT. If you watch the news, there are parents going to school board meetings. The school board members are getting up and walking out. Some of the parents are getting arrested because they're fed up of their children being forced to listen to the CRT madness, that they are the oppressor and they're racist. And no one wins, in my opinion, in that situation. And so if you're a pastor and you have the space, I would encourage you to start a Christian school, because in no time it'll probably fill up. Parents are looking for options. Policymakers are starting to listen, and that would be my phone. Turn it off. Thank you. State efforts to stop CRT indoctrination in the classroom. And so, fortunately, we have about 21 states that have introduced legislation to limit indoctrination in public schools. And I must say, hooray for Texas. I don't know if you all know it, how many of you knew that our governor has signed a law that will go into effect September 1st, and we will not be able to, they will not be able to teach CRT in our school system. And also, how many of you heard about the 1619 project? Yeah, he canceled that. They wanted to make that the year of our founding because that's the year that slaves arrived on our shores. And so, nope, we're going with the original founding. So yeah, you can read those states there. Like, what parents can do, okay? You can show up at school board meetings and explain why critical race theory has no place in the classroom. Send a letter to the principal, letting him or her know what you think about the teaching of critical race theory. Some states' legislators and governors have tried to prevent the teaching of critical race theory, as we just said. You can email the State Department of Education and ask if there are any plans to include critical race. We don't have that problem in Texas, as I just said, but you may know people in other states that you might want to share this information with. Start a petition to keep critical race theory out of local schools. Those are our two children. David and Charisma a couple of years ago. I want to share just a little bit about my personal experience. And so our son is 9, he's getting ready to be 10. And he has had some negative interactions with white boys. And we listen to Fox News, and we're hearing the news, and so we think they're playing, but they're listening too. And they're talking about CRT, and they're talking about racism, and I'm sure there's stuff maybe coming up on their iPads or whatever. And recently, he started saying that these boys are racist. It's racism, Mom. And so I'll give you one example. We put him in, right after school was over, we put him in football camp. And he got in a car one day, and he started telling me about a story of a little boy. He said he was in line. They were taking turns doing whatever the activity was. He said the boy tried to nudge him. He said he wouldn't move. He nudged him back. He said David said when I wouldn't move, he kicked me in the bottom of my leg, and I lost my balance and I fell. He said then the boy called me weak. He said that when he got up, he punched me in the back. He said then he called me a sucker. By that time, I'm like backing up the car as fast as I can to get back to the coach to figure out what on earth is going on here. So, David is comical, so he said, I'm not a sucker, you're a sucker, go suck on your pacifier. So, but he's not aggressive. He's a kind boy. He's aggressive on the soccer field, and now he wants to play football, but he's just not an aggressive boy. He loves people, and he wants to be friends. And so I get to the curb, the coach is still there, and I explain that David had something to explain. I made David explain to the coach what happened. And he said, we don't tolerate this, we'll take care of it and everything. So I took him at his word, but I wanted to be sure he didn't forget. So when I got home, I sent him a nice email. And in my email, I said, this is a teachable moment. This is a teachable moment. Because in my son's mind, because the boy is white, he's a racist. His parents probably just didn't teach him any better. Maybe his parents need to teach him, not to do that. Now, there are some boys that are just very aggressive. But that was out of order. Kicking him and punching him and name-calling was out of order. David never hit him back. He never touched him. Teach your children, don't put your hands on people. Don't do that. So the next day, I picked David up, and I asked him, did they take care of it? And he said, yeah, they took care of it. A couple of weeks later, we're just talking, and David said to me, Mom, somebody at school called me a chimp. My son is handsome. I'm like, you ain't no chimp. That is not a nice thing to say. That's hurtful. So, but what I'm trying to say to my son, to our son, is everything that happens, just like the young lady at Smith College, because she's black and she's in the wrong place and the janitor sees her and calls security, she's calling racist. Everything's not racist. Some things are just misunderstandings. Some things just you don't know any better. Some things, your parents need to sit you down or, give you a spanking. So I'm at that place, Bill and I are at that place now where we're trying to teach him now. I'm not saying that we don't have a problem with racism in our country, but it's not just white people. I know some black racists, and they're Mexican racists. And even within our black culture, we have problems, Pastor Erica, with dark skin versus light skin and all of that. So I'm not going to stand here and pretend that racism doesn't exist, but I am going to say that we have to judge the matter correctly. We have to judge the matter correctly. And we have to start at home and in our churches. How pastors can help combat CRT. Teach kindness and respect for others through the youth ministry. Emphasize the problems with reducing people to racial categories. Model this behavior at home and church. Encourage parents to refrain from making biased statements about race and ethnicity, and sometimes we're guilty of that. And the children are listening, paying attention. That boy heard somebody call somebody a chimp somewhere for him to call my son a chimp. Preach about values of forgiveness and love over blame and anger. Pastors, that's key. Love and forgiveness. So, in summary, critical race theory is an offshoot of Marxism that replaces class with race. Critical race theory says that race is the sole reason that problems of inequality, poverty, and educational gaps exist. We know that's a lie. What about fatherlessness? There are no fathers in the homes, poverty. There are lots of other reasons. Critical race theory says that because our society, our economy, our government, and our culture are inherently racist, the only solution is to dismantle it entirely. When taken to the classroom, the central lesson of critical race theory are America is racist, capitalism is racist and wrong, white people are responsible for that racism and should bear shame and guilt for their part in that privilege they experience. At the elementary level, this becomes America is bad because it is racist and white people are responsible. God is not in that. It's a lie from the pit of hell. God is not in that. And so at the end of the day, we should come together and stand for what is just and right in the sight of God. And be sure we judge correctly out of love and forgiveness towards others. And let us always remember we're one flag, one land, one heart, one hand, one nation, forevermore. These are the references for those of you who might be interested. And I've really enjoyed giving this talk. Thank you for listening, and I pray that you have a better understanding of critical race theory. God bless you.